And joining me to talk about this is legal expert advocate Mkhululi Stubbs. Advocate, good evening and thank you for your time, and I appreciate you joining us tonight. What would be an indicator, in your opinion, of a justice system that is effectively responding to gender-based violence during a time of a pandemic?
Hi, Thabo. Thanks. An indicator, in my opinion, would probably be that where there are urgent circumstances of gender-based violence that might lead to serious injury or otherwise, even to death, that those are actually able to be addressed in court in a timeliest manner. There is some concern about whether that is the case under COVID, and I'm sure that that is what you've been speaking about on your show this evening. As to whether we have statistics that bear out whether the one is the case or the other is the case, I don't know. But in the abstract, I'd say the test is really, is the justice system accessible in time to save people from harm that would otherwise result?
Now, in South Africa, you hear those in the system saying, well, we've got the legal framework, we've got the statutes, we've got the procedural law that provides access to justice. But does that happen in practice?
So the law is one thing, but a constitutional court judge once said to me that there are places that the law doesn't go. And what I think was meant by that is that it's all well and good for us to have, as you say, legislation, regulations, etc., that look good and that look as though they intend to do the right thing. But there is also the fact that law is about regulating the conduct of people, right? It's a social science, and it is an empirical exercise. So the law is always looking at things backwards. It's only once things have happened that the law is often able to intervene. One needs to make out a very strong case for intervention before something bad has happened. So we've got great laws and the laws look good, but we have a lot of work to do in relation to how those laws are operationalized in order to achieve the objectives that they seek to achieve.
Is the implementation of those laws sufficiently funded, one, but also the governance mechanism in place to guide its implementation, are they effective?
So one needs the laws, and I think that one needs people who are implementing the laws in the spirit in which they're intended to implement them. I think that there may be, with great respect to the great work that our social workers do, that our lawyers do, our state prosecutors, I'm sure that many or all of them are extremely well-intentioned, but as to the way that a complaint is received, as to whether, for example, let's speak about women as the most vulnerable and probably pertinent gender group or group in South Africa, demographic in South Africa from the perspective of immediate justice. The way that we receive complaints, the way that we make people who are making complaints feel welcome, feel heard, and action those complaints, that may be a shortcoming, and that may not be because of the fact that there are bad faith actors who are involved in the process. It may also be a question of capacity. Unfortunately, the amount of gender-based violence that exists in South Africa is a lot higher than we would ever want it to be, and the amount of resources that we have to address the issue are probably a lot less than we would want them to be. So you've got a disconnect there, which may be part of the reason that we have these difficulties that we're experiencing.
The directions issued by the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services as soon as the President announced the state of disaster and the act was in place, restricted particularly court precincts, for instance, in respect to criminal matters, and only urgent matters were being heard. How did that affect the cases that had to do with gender-based violence?
Yeah, so I haven't myself run a case in regard to gender-based violence in the last couple of months, so I can't tell you from my own personal perspective of gender-based violence cases go, but I can tell you that due to COVID and the entire lockdown, even in civil cases, which would not be as urgent as gender-based violence sort of cases, we're experiencing serious backlogs, serious delays. And although it is, as I said before, a brave new world in relation to the way that we have hearings, certainly the court rolls are a heck of a lot more clogged up than they were before the lockdown happened, because the lockdown effectively stopped all litigation save for COVID-related litigation in its initial stages. So it has, I would say, had a deliberate impact on criminal cases that had to do with GBV getting to court unless they are urgent. And I'd add one more thing to that. The ability of a litigant to get into court on an urgent basis has, in my experience, changed. You need to do a lot more work in order to convince a court that you have what is defined legally as urgency. And I think that that's in part due to the fact that there are so many cases that are in court that you really have to shout loud, so to speak, in order to make sure that you're first in line.
Now, it has been brought again tonight, this question, and it has been said in previous times before, that there is an imbalance between the rights of survivors as compared to the rights of the accused in South Africa. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, so, I mean, what we've seen empirically is that there has been some terrible, terrible violence. And what the law is meant to do is to ensure that violence doesn't occur, and also to ensure that it's prevented from occurring in future. I think from what I've seen in the news, from what we've all seen in the news, I'm afraid to say that violence may be gaining the upper hand. What we need to do as lawyers, as regulators, is to find a way that works practically to ensure that the balance tips back to the right side of the scale.
How far are we from a justice system that is service delivery oriented, that is survivor focused, that is victim centered, so that should a victim interact with it, can come out of it and saying, I'm really satisfied with how the program has gone and the processes and the type of response that I've received? Sure.
I'd love to say that we're very close to that, Thabo, but in my view, and I think my view is probably shared by a lot of our fellow citizens, we are quite far away from that. I think that it's probably necessary for proactive measures to be taken, especially in the light of the terrible, egregious, and really saddening incidents that have happened in the recent past. We need to draft regulations, do training, and ensure that resources are focused towards what is actually a really urgent issue, because I think that we are quite far away from properly addressing it.
Mkhululi Stubbs, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us tonight and helping us with that conversation.